Welcome to another edition of the podcast known as Blending the Family. I am your host in the home office, back home, taking a week off, Tommy Maloney. Yeah. Woo! So happy to be home. So happy. That was me smacking my hand on my desk. Happy to be home. Get to hang with the puppy, Otis, who on Valentine's Day, we decided that is going to be his birthday. We decided a while back. But when we got Otis in May of last year, he was already 3 months old. So February, March, April, May, guesstimated. So happy birthday to our fur baby, Otis. As I said, I'm home. I'm home. Let me start off with this. I originally took this week off because I thought, this is where communication comes in. I thought I was going to have some minor medical work done. Turns out, no, it was just a consultation before the assessment of saying, yes, you need this medical thing taken care of. So now I am hoping that I can get this taken care of in the month of March, because I took another week off in March. So that was disappointing. You know, you go somewhere, you're all excited, and then, nope. And also, speaking of disappointments, my computer is broken. Even though I'm recording this on my laptop, I can no longer access Wi-Fi. And why is that, Tommy, you ask? Well, because Tommy thought he was smart, looked up on Google how to fix the Wi-Fi issue, and ended up, breaking the computer. I am really hoping that this stimulus check that they're talking about actually happens, because that money will go to a new laptop. Yes, I'm doing, after 9 years of this MacBook Pro, I love my MacBook. I love it. The whole reason why I bought it was for podcasting. But after 9 years, I think it's time for a new one. So as I said, I'm home. I'm at the home office, loving this because I got to do something I don't do a lot of, and that's cook. I'm not a good cook. I'm not. I can boil water. I've made hard-boiled eggs. I've occasionally failed at making hard-boiled eggs. I do love learning how to cook. And last night I made, and my wife, I made chicken breasts. I found online a marinade that I made, and I was disappointed. So I asked her, I said, well, what does it taste like? And she goes, did you use barbecue sauce to marinate this? I'm like, no, I was bummed. And so learning opportunity there. And next time I will add more of the ingredients. I don't know. There was just the flavor I was hoping for didn't pop, didn't come out. Been doing some writing. If you follow me on LinkedIn, you would have seen a post I put out called Leadership in Action. And we're going to get to a special announcement, a major announcement, which ties this together. As I said, I'm home this week, and during President's Day weekend in the hockey world, in the youth hockey world, there's always tournaments. Last year, this time, I was actually, where were we? We were in Phoenix. I think it was Phoenix. Yes. We were in Phoenix, Arizona for a hockey tournament there. And this year, the boy, a.k.a. Connor, is doing both, playing high school hockey and what we call house hockey. So house hockey is you don't travel. He was on a travel team last year, so hence that's why we were out of state. Anyway, we had a local tournament this year, and the team ended up in the semifinals. So excited for this group of kids. I mean, they're under 18s. I can still call them kids. So they're in the semifinals, and not only are they in the semifinals, they go into overtime. The score is 0-0. Not only do we go into overtime, right before the referee dropped the puck for overtime, Connor gathers the players that are on the ice and has this huddle. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, that's my kid. So he has this huddle, and he's telling them, in overtime they only play, they go four aside versus 5 aside. And he's like, you'll have more ice, you'll have more space, take advantage of it. And so it was so cool to watch. It was so, oh my gosh. Not only am I witnessing leadership in action, but as a parent, you just never know what life lessons your kids are watching. And your kids are always watching. So I on LinkedIn, I wrote this piece called Leadership in Action. So you can find me on LinkedIn, the Tommy Maloney on LinkedIn. And I hope you enjoy that article. So what's the major announcement? Thanks for asking. This is a proud dad moment, and unfortunately I didn't get to witness this game. However, I am so blessed that even though I think I drive both teams that Connor plays on, the parents nuts, because I'm a little outspoken. I'm a sarcastic son of a gun. I like to have fun. And I don't think a lot of parents really like me, and that's okay. That's okay. I'm a goalie dad, and goalie dads, we're different. We are just way different. So the major announcement is Connor was selected as the Player of the Week. How cool is that? So he stopped 47 shots to help his high school team force a 3-3 tie with the other team back on February 6th. Well, I went to both teams, both managers, and said, hey, can we please get an announcement out there to please, because you had to vote, and voting was open every day for a few days, and so Connor was selected, and I see if it shows again. Yeah, so it was close. It was a close voting. There were 687 votes. I'm like, wow. So 687 votes. Connor had 36% of the votes. The next closest was 33%. So it was a tight race. It was a tight few days, and it was very stressful. And if you are a parent and your child is playing sports, there are times where you're stressed. And I was not only stressed when the team went into overtime, and then the team ended up going into a shootout because neither team scored. I was just more stressed today of this recording, because today was when the voting ended, than I was when the team went to the shootout, because I have faith in Connor. He's really good on breakaways, so I knew the team was safe that way. It was just didn't know how the players in front of Connor, as far as shooting, scoring goals, was going to happen. And luckily the the team, because there are girls on the team too, the team won. Unfortunately, they did not do fare as well in the final, in the championship game, but still so proud of the team, and so proud of the coaches, friends that I've known for years. But overall, again, it was a proud dad moment. So please go to LinkedIn, find that piece, Leadership in Action, and I hope you enjoy that. I want to go here. We're going to go here. So one of the past guests on this podcast, Taj Deshawn, he has a new book out, Thrive After Sports, Helping Athletes Dominate the Game of Life. So this is my book recommendation for this podcast, Thrive After Sports by Taj Deshawn. I am so proud of Taj and his book. I have a copy. This is the book, if you can hear it. Me thumbing through the pages. You can find Taj on LinkedIn at Taj Deshawn. That's TAJDASHAUN. I will put that in the show notes. Thrive After Sports. It's a great book. Taj wrote it as far as helping athletes, and this is more of the college athletes transitioning into real life. But when I read this book, I see this as not only if you have a young athlete in high school going from high school to college, but this is a great business book too. So if you're an entrepreneur, solopreneur, this is a great book because it gives some great advice about the business world. Taj is a business person. He's a coach. He coaches athletes for, again, transitioning. He's got his website, tajdeshawn.com. Again, put that in the show notes. So I highly recommend picking up Taj's book, Thrive After Sports, Helping Athletes Dominate the Game of Life. All right. What is this podcast about today? And if this is your first time listening, I guess I should have mentioned that. On this podcast, we've talked about, we've had developers, app developers for co-parenting apps. We have had guests, former SWAT officer talking about mental health, men's mental health, leadership. And right now, as far as books go, I'm in the tail end of finishing up my book, My Dad's Advice at 5:04 a.m. This episode is me reading Chapter 1. Now, if you saw my post on Instagram, I mentioned that this is raw. This is just, it hasn't fully been edited, and that's okay. I want to give you the gist of what the book's all about. So, previous episode on this podcast, I did the backstory of the book. So now we're doing Chapter 1 of the book, My Dad's Advice at 5:04 a.m. Now, the book is on pre-sale. You can get the pre-sale, which is at mydadsadvicebook.com, mydadsadvicebook.com. So Chapter 1, I talk about when my parents divorced. I talk about witnessing that firsthand. Also talk about transitioning a bit from being a divorced dad into marriage life. But it's still, we're talking the first chapter, okay? So there you go. That's what this podcast episode is all about. Chapter 1 of my book, My Dad's Advice at 5:04 a.m. I hope you enjoy it. I hope you enjoy listening to this. And please, I am one of those people, it's very difficult for me to ask for help, and I'm asking. Please go to the website, mydadsadvicebook.com. Pick up a copy or two for maybe for somebody else. I wrote the book to spotlight positive fathers, but I wrote it for single moms, divorced moms, because as I've said before, I will be the first to admit I am not good at being an ex-husband, but I'm good at being a dad. And that's why I wrote the book, was to let others know that there are good dads out there. Again, we might be horrible former spouses, but we're involved in our kids' lives. We support our kids. And there you go. And I'm losing my voice from doing the reading. Cold coffee. All right. Well, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for uploading this. Thank you for, walking your dog. Maybe you're on the treadmill for gyms that are open, or maybe you're at home. You have a treadmill at home and you're doing a workout. So that's all I have to say. As Terry Crews would say, your success is my success. Have a wonderful day, and I hope to be home more often from the home office. My earliest memories living in Chicago as a young child are few. I think back and they're more like Polaroid moments, or as today's kids would call them, a selfie moment. Okay, maybe they might not call them that. A happy moment I do recall, as brief as it is, but still has been tattooed on my brain, was a time swimming with my dad at the local Y, where I would be on his back as we would go all over the pool, including underwater. I even want to say that he dove into the water while I was clinging on to dear life. Before my parents' divorce, when I was around 5 years old, so not a lot of storied memories that I can really recollect. I had wanted to write a commentary when my parents were married to each other. I do not have memories that I can recall. I don't know, is that sad? The most significant thought that impacted my life in many ways that you will read more about throughout this book, including my struggles with depression and low self-esteem, I watched my parents' marriage break up right in front of me. Suppose I could talk to you about having disagreements in front of your kids. Having conflict is about your kids learning about compromise. It can teach them how to stand up for themselves. Having a calming tone in both individual voices should be a fair battle between adults. However, if you will have a yelling match that will create the next civil war, do the right thing. Send the kids to a safe place outside of the home. I generally do not remember hearing my parents fight, but I was there to witness my dad leaving while my mom was in the bedroom, crying hysterically. I hope you see my point and understand what I meant, that it is okay to have disagreements in front of your kids versus a no-holds-barred drag-out with words. Watching from the front row of my parents' marriage, concluding right in front of me, would impact me. Not knowing what that impact would be into my junior high days. The day I watched my dad leave us was from the second floor of the apartment building we lived in. There was this big window that overlooked out the courtyard. The courtyard sidewalk is where my dad stood to wave to me, as I sat from the window, waving back to him while I was hearing my mom cry. That moment would be somewhat of a foreshadowing of my own life approximately 37 years later down the road. Please remember this. If you ever end up in a situation of going through a separation or divorce, you do not want your kids watching as you leave. A memory you do not want your kids to have in their fragile minds. Oh, memories. A Chicago police officer was waking me up was the next major milestone I remember from living in the apartment in Chicago. A neighbor had fallen asleep with a cigarette and set the apartment building on fire. My grandparents, who lived in the suburbs, came to get me, and thus began the next chapter in my life of my mom and I as we moved to an apartment in Highland Park, Illinois. I vaguely have the picture of the officer bundling me up and carrying me to some first aid truck outside. Looking back on the scene, I cannot help but wonder how many different ways my life would be if that fire never happened. I say this because of some what ifs. I try and stay away from playing that what if game. However, what if we stayed in Chicago? Would I have seen my dad more? We'll talk about this later. What if I went to school in Chicago? And how would that shape or change my life? There is no what if about the divorce of my parents, And what I mean is that I firmly believe that there was inevitability that was going to happen anyway. As I sit here putting these words down and looking out the window at Colorado's mountains from my home office, it gives me a bit of perspective. Our lives are mostly about decisions. There are decisions we make, and there are decisions others make that directly affect our lives. My mom and dad decided that marriage to each other is not for them. A man decides to smoke in bed. These two events changed the course of my life, and, again, my perspective of how these dots took me from Chicago to where I am today here in Colorado. My parents' divorce and the advice my dad gave me when my son Connor was born have shaped me into the person I am today. Personally, my parents' divorce helped me become a good dad. The advice my dad gave me subsequently helped mold what a father should be. After the fire, my mom and I settled into a new apartment right up the street from her parents', my grandparents' house. My new world was either a bike ride away or within walking distance. The TV show Green Acres illustrates the difference between how or where to raise me. My dad is a city guy. My mom wanted me in the burbs. The times I would visit my dad, I can remember the feeling of not wanting to walk every place, but rather cab it. However, today when we visit Chicago, I love walking and feeling the energy downtown has to offer. Funny how life changes you. I love walking. I really do. After school, my thoughts of spending time doing my homework under the watchful eye of either my grandmother or her dad, my great-grandfather Frank, are happy memories. Listening to Frank regale about his days playing youth baseball or just watching how meticulous he was at doing the daily crossword puzzle. I spent many days and evenings with my grandparents because my mom worked 2 jobs and attended night school. My dad found a place too. If you've ever heard the joke of an apartment that was so small that you needed to go outside to change your mind, well, that was my dad's new place. It was a studio apartment, and I do not recall how long he lived there because I can only recall one memory of being there. Little did I one day realize that the first place I lived after my divorce were hotels. The next apartment my dad moved into was my favorite. It was an old warehouse that was converted into apartments. It even had a grocery store in the building and a pool, get this, on the roof. The apartment itself was huge and overlooked downtown Chicago. I wish that I had appreciated more time spent with my dad. I am no psychiatrist, nor do I play one on TV, but I'm sure I had a lot of resentment about the divorce. I also want to believe that deep down my mom understood the importance of how she felt about my dad, that she knew I needed to spend time with him. My dad taught me things that I ended up using later in life without him actually showing me. For example, be kind to strangers. I remember coming out of a restaurant with leftovers and he handed them to a homeless person. I also learned the importance of using people's names. He was notorious for making sure he read a name tag or would ask a waitstaff member their name and continuously use their name. Another thing I learned from my dad was make connections. My dad's nickname is the Mayor of Michigan Avenue. He not only knows people, but he was so great at asking people questions. He's a born salesman, but I want to make sure that I let you know he's not that spammy kind of salesperson. He's one of those people that actually, as a salesperson, has integrity. Another piece of advice, be present. When we would have class field trips to Chicago, my dad would volunteer to be a chaperone. I took that life lesson with my son as I chaperoned field trips too. One thing that I really learned from my dad, and some days I need this more than ever, and that was patience. My dad knew that I would be bored at the apartment, so we would go and get a toy for me to have for the weekend. I once gave a keynote address and talked about this example. After the talk, this guy came up to me and told me how spoiled I was. We'll just leave it at that. Anyway, my dad and I would be at the store for hours for me to select one toy to have. Dad was super patient while waiting for me to make a choice. Oh, and yes, he would make conversations with the staff or other parents while we were waiting there. The times I spent with my dad was not always about receiving life lessons or not honestly calling them happy moments. As a child, you do not have a say when to visit your dad or do you want to see your dad. One of the most significant pointers when coaching couples is introducing your new friend to the kids. There was a time I made a huge scene when I met one of my dad's new girlfriends for the first time. Not only was I meeting her, but we were also staying at her apartment overnight. Hey, just a tip here, when you're introducing your friend to your kids, schedule something that the kids enjoy doing, where the kids are not forced into anything. When my dad told me that this is where we were sleeping, I became a devil child. There was so much rage in me that it all came out on this particular visit. The tantrum I tossed was the tantrums of all tantrums. I even used the phrase when one is not in their right frame of mind towards their dad or parents. In this case, it was, "You are not my dad." Pre-Star Wars reference. Oh, this poor woman who's meeting me for the first time while listening to this child lose it in her front hall closet. Well, this is where I was hanging out as my happy place. She must have realized that the invention of any birth control was the best invention ever created for this moment. I do not know whom I should have felt more sorry for. My dad, who had to be the witness of his son flaking out, or my mom, because she had to drive an hour down to pick me up, since I was not in my right frame of mind. Fair warning to you of taking time bringing a new person into your family life or suffer the consequences of watching a child reenact a scene from The Exorcist. On a personal note, I am sorry, Dad, that I acted that way. Talk about patience. Loyalty from a child's world can be difficult, especially when there is a divorce. Honestly, our children do not want to take sides or rock the boat, but frequently they're involuntary to take sides. For example, as I was writing this part of the book, my son is on spring break with his mom. I've often told him that I leave it up to him when he is on trips to call me. He has yet to reach out all week. And I get it because he is very loyal to his mom, and heck, he's at Disney World. I too was very devoted to my mom since she raised me, and mostly because the whole watching my dad leaving us was such an impact on my psyche. There's another piece here when it comes to the aspect of loyalty, and that is not using your children as messengers. You might have seen this from parents that will put their children in the middle and use them as pawns. This is not a healthy mentality for children, nor is this how to co-parent. Parenting is not, as many of you realize, a sitcom where many of life's trials and tribulations are solved within 30 minutes or less. It does not matter if you are happily married or divorced, parenting or co-parenting. What matters is raising the best kids possible. My mom would often remind me that it took about 10 years for her and my dad to have a civil conversation. Communication in any relationship is vital. When communicating with your former spouse might be rough, or maybe you have an open dialogue with them. That is wonderful. In my world and several of my friends, both male and female, struggle with communication with their former spouses. Do you think that the creation of email and texting has helped your communication with your former spouse? Personally, the best thing about using email to communicate is that you have a record. Yes, The point I'm making is that if you need documentation, you will have it. Looking back at my folks, I think they would have preferred email than talking to each other. How cool would it be to have life's problem solved like a sitcom? I'm sure the laugh track might get annoying, or have a studio audience instead. I don't know if I could feed them all. I'm very blessed to have the support of my mom and dad throughout the years. They both have offered me advice and also offered me a roof over my head when I needed it. On the plus side, their marriage did create me, and I have a son because of their marriage. The divorce has affected me emotionally, as you have read so far, but it also has been a life manual for me when my marriage to Connor's mom came to an end. When I remarried back in August of 2012, not only did I win the lottery of my wife Anne, but her 2 daughters have been a blessing. As I stated, the fact that I was there firsthand to watch my parents split will always be ingrained in me. We cannot change back the clocks, but I hope you and I, together, can learn from tragedies and then find ways to move forward. I understand that my dad wanted to be a bachelor and not wanted to live in the birds. Instead, he chose the big city of Chicago to live in. My dad and I have grown closer throughout the years, and I hold zero grudges toward him. He is one of my mentors and one of my biggest supporters. I have used real-life experiences when I write or even bring up memories on my podcast. I am well aware that possibly there will come a time when my son will bring up those moments in his life that will reflect poorly on me. I will own them and tell him, as a dad and as my dad told me, we're doing what we thought was best. Parenting is not rainbows and unicorns. Parenting is learning and teaching every day, no matter what the outcome is all about. Who knows, maybe Connor will remember when I took him for his first swimming lessons. Pick up the book at mydadsadvicebook.com, mydadsadvicebook.com. Question of the podcast: who is your favorite motivational speaker?